This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
This, but it was actually the poison from the bullet that killed Abraham Lincoln.
Unearthed Arcana.
Do they go far enough? Are they spooky enough?
No.
Can you effectively do horror in this edition of D&D?
What product is this for?
Speaking of horrible people, we have an email.
You don't even know what stupid thing I'm going to say yet. You just know by the tone of voice.
All that and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. And this podcast comes with pre-rolled sleeves because we are ready to dive in this week. My name's Ben Byrne, by the way, and also coming with their pre-rolled sleeves, Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, James Hake. And James, I've got to ask you, what is your favorite type of horror?
I love psychological horror. I love that creeping suspense of something not being quite right, of someone's growing paranoia. I don't think anyone would call Vertigo a horror movie, but it is one of the scariest movies I've ever watched. Just the sense of dread I got watching it as the psychological elements of it came into play.
James took my answer, so I'm going to now have to pivot, if you will, to gothic horror.
Okay.
Especially the literature of, say, the mid 1800s, that sort of Castle of Otranto, people in peril in a strange and old and ancient place with sort of weird things going on around them that could be explained, but also maybe supernatural, and you're never quite sure. I love me some of that, and then you throw a little bit of Dracula in there at the tail end, and some Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I'm there for that.
My wife and I talk about this often, is this idea of, can you imagine reading Dracula when it first released, having no idea what it was, and having no idea what Dracula is? Like, was that obvious to people reading the novel if they didn't already know through cultural osmosis? Or was that something that the novel reveals to you, as it tarries on?
As someone who's been alive almost that long, but not quite, I can't answer.
I mean, that wasn't a question directed directly at you, Shawn, but...
Sure it wasn't.
My literature degree does tell me that vampires as a cultural concept in like what we would now call the West were not as commonplace a concept. They had appeared in literature and some popular literature before then, but it wasn't like, this is absolutely what is going on. It and then various depictions of vampires throughout time, including film, like Todd Browning's Dracula, or of course Nosferatu. Those kind of established and locked in the things that signal to us that's a vampire. So reading that book, you wouldn't necessarily, when it first came out, have known this is what's going on and this is how they should defeat it, which is why Van Helsing is such an important character. Yeah. Anyway.
Wait, I want to comment on this. Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was, if I remember correctly, published serially and not as a novel, right? In a literary magazine, as was common at the time.
Don't remember.
I don't know.
I don't remember, but I
certainly
believe that's
published serially now in Dracula Daily.
Dracula Daily, yes. But a lot of the tropes that established had already in some way appeared in another very popular European novel, this time a continental one, a French one, Carmilla by Dufanu, which engages in a certain level of eroticism, a certain level of class differential. This one has certainly an interesting claim for a sapphic read, as both the vampire and the human prey are women. And so there's a little bit of zeitgeist in the air when it comes to Bram Stoker's novel coming out, but I'm not sure if you could say that the general population, I think people would more readily read it as a critique of British imperialism of the Irish, given that Stoker himself was an Irishman.
Also worth keeping in mind that famously the story goes that Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, and another guy whose name was John William Polidori were hanging out on holiday, and they got stuck inside during a thunderstorm. And so they started a challenge who could write the sort of scariest story. And that's where we got Frankenstein's earliest version from. And that's where we got the story The Vampire, which was successful. But by the fact that none of us knew that guy's name, I'm speaking for all of us now, none of us knew that guy's name, it was not as successful. as the other ones, but it did kind of plant a seed of vampirism in the minds of the romantics. So that's fun. Anyway, my favorite kind of horror is I'm a total scaredy cat. So the number of like true horror films I have seen, I can count on one hand. I don't think I've read much horror. I would count it as horror, Beloved by Toni Morrison. But I think my favorite genre of horror has to be zombie films. I really like zombie stories or zombie books because they sit in a slightly different pocket of horror that I am able to cope with. They're still scary, but I can cope with them.
Really? That's interesting.
Because I used to be really scared of zombie stories, but my brother and I fixated on it through our fear. Yeah. And now I've watched so many zombie movies.
I honestly struggle a little bit with zombie movies, maybe less so now because The Walking Dead desensitized me a little bit. Somebody told me that The Walking Dead's not scary, it's just disgusting. And I think I agree with that.
Yeah. I think horror comes in kind of three categories for me. It's jump scares, gore, and like nightmare fuel that just kind of sits in your brain and seems like a spooky concept. And I can handle jump scares even though I hate them because they're gone after the moment. And I'm not scared of gore. So zombie movies are great for me because that's all they have to offer, really.
Can't say I'm a fan of jump scares. And I'm kind of the same, Dael. I'm not a huge fan of like horror with a capital R. Like I hate slasher movies. I'm not a fan of jump scares. I'm not into like, Saw or even like zombie movies. I'm not a huge fan of. But I do love me some gothic horror and some kind of existential horror as well. Anyway, speaking of horror, we currently have 5 free unlock codes for Lairs of Etheris on D&D Beyond, which we are giving away on this episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. Lairs of Etheris, if you don't know, is our adventure module's 20 horror-themed adventures for levels 1 through 20, some of which written by one Shawn Merwin, which you can add as side quests to a campaign. A lot of these are monster hunt themed, where you delve into the lair of the monster that you're hunting. So you can run them as side quests in a campaign. You can string them together to be one long campaign. You can use them as spooky one-shots if you're, trying out these Unearthed Arcana horror subclasses, possibly. There are 70 horror-themed Grim Hollow Monster stat blocks, including the Fey Bone Collector, one of my favorites, a little Fey creature who kind of bargains for bones. If I've mumbled too much, we're giving away 5 codes to unlock Lairs of Etheris for free. If you hit the link in the show notes, you can enter the random draw before next week's episode is published onto YouTube and Spotify and all the other places. And we will choose some lucky folks to receive those codes. So hit the link in the show notes and Unearthed Arcana has been unearthed. Out of the grave comes 8 new subclasses from Wizards of the Coast, available on D&D Beyond. Not in-app, but you get the Unearthed Arcana PDF document from D&D Beyond. Just Google Unearthed Arcana. That's how I find it each time. Anyway, it has released 8 new horror subclasses in no particular order, but alphabetical works just as well. The Artificer Reanimator, the Bard College of Spirits, the Cleric Grave Domain. Some of these are rehashes of earlier versions of something. The Ranger Hollow Warden, the Rogue Phantom, the Sorcerer Shadow Sorcery, the Warlock Hexblade Patron, and the other Warlock, the Undead Patron.
I'm stoked that they've had another run at the College of Spirits Bard. It always bugged me that its table was pitched as like Tales of blah, blah, blah. And now they've just kind of rehashed it and gone, you know what? These are just the ghosts that visit you. You're visited by the spirit of the coward. You're visited by the spirit of the brute, whoever. And that's how I did it when I rewrote it for my crazy person document. So, I am stoked that they've had another run at that. And I think that they've done a really good job. I also thought the Artificer Reanimator was really cool, really flavorful. Oh. Yeah.
Teacher, that was a good idea, wasn't it? Strong theme, you might say. Anyway, okay, cool. Anyone else? Anything jump out at anyone else?
No, I have to also say the concept behind the Reanimator Artificer is pretty sick. I wonder.
Really? Let's see how high we can get his voice to go.
I'm in the middle of proofing the Grim Hollow Player's Guide. which has 10, 30, 34 horror themed subclasses. So I didn't have time for 8 or whatever more on the brain. I took a pass on this one.
Let me ask this as the outsider who doesn't write for Grim Hollow and has the freedom to cause such trouble. What are your just general opinions on their take on horror for D&D classes? Do they go far enough? Are they spooky enough?
No. Speaking of these subclasses, look, I read this in detail because we did a stream on it yesterday. I don't want to talk too much because everybody knows my opinions and I want to get your folks' opinions, but just a lightning round these super quickly. The Reanimator, basically the Grim Hollow one, but higher fantasy, which is fine. Like I said yesterday, I'm glad it's going to be probably on D&D Beyond for people in future to use this style of subclass. The College of Spirits is also really cool. I agree with you, Dael, that kind of sinuous sacrifice idea of like whispering spirits in your ears. And I think the design behind it's really elegant, where you roll your bardic inspiration dice to get an effect, and that table is 12 effects possible. So as you level up, you get access to more effects just naturally as your bardic inspiration dice becomes larger. I think that's really elegantly done. Grave Domain's the Grave Domain. It's not particularly frightening. The Hollow Warden Ranger is trash, honestly, in my opinion. It just
I fell asleep while reading it.
Yeah, it's not exciting at all. The Phantom Rogue seems lost in what it's trying to do. It's not the ghost rogue that you want it to be. It's not like I'm a ghost and I'm a rogue, but it's also not really the ghost hunter, which they kind of put little speckles of that in there a little bit, and it doesn't really accomplish that super well. Sorcerer Shadow Sorcery is fine. It's kind of what it was from Xanathar's. The Hex Warlock, as I'm now calling it, because Blade should just be crossed out. It has absolutely nothing to do with being a martial warrior at all anymore, except for maybe you get one smite spell on your spell list, and that's all. Particularly because the Pact of the Blade ate the Hexblade Warlock's lunch a little bit when it got the charisma, use a martial weapon with your charisma modifier. And the Undead Patron is just really broad as well, because it wants to be flexible enough to be like, your patron can be whatever sort of undead you want it to be. It could be a Death Knight, it could be a Lich, it could be a vampire. But as a result, the abilities feel really watered down and really like, oh, this is like, you get some temporary hit points, you're hard to kill. 3 different subclasses in this Unearthed Arcana have the same feature fundamentally that works slightly differently, which is you're reduced to 0 hit points. You come back with hit points equal to X times your class or spell level or something. So basically you drop to 0, you come back with about 50 hit points once per long rest type ability. And the Undead Warlock is one that has it. I think the Ranger has it, and I think something else has it. But yeah, they kind of get progressive. They start great. I really love the Reanimator. Who knew? And I think they do an all right job at the balloon animal artist version of the Reanimator Artificer.
But then they just seem to get like an artificer than most artificers. That's I think what I liked about it was that I could see. I mean, I wish that the augmentations felt a little bit more Frankenstein-y, because you get your little reanimated guy. Yeah. And you put little augmentations on them, and those are cool. I wish the augmentations were more like, I don't know, you give it hammers for hands or something. Like, I wish that it was a little bit more, you have stitched together a monstrosity, rather than just being like, I don't know, have these nebulous qualities. Then I would have been like 100% happy with it.
The 2 issues with it, which one of them kind of touches on what you just said. The first issue is that somebody pointed out you can use any artificer tool to make them, so you can fry yourself up a golem with some cook's utensils, which just instantly is like, okay, this is very high fantasy, because it tells
think of that
Black Cauldron.
Okay, we went to different places. I went to that guy from early Power Rangers who used to put the little guys in the oven and bake up the monster.
Right, and like, cauldron.
Don't get me wrong. There's definitely space for creative ways of creating your golem using the fact that there's flexibility here, but it does not lend itself to horror because of that enabled flexibility.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, one of the golem's features that's baked into it is that when it is reduced to 0 hit points, it explodes and deals damage, which incentivizes you to send it into battle and just explode, because you can resurrect another one with a first level spell slot. Basically, when you can create it from thin air using cook's utensils, basically whenever you want. So instantly you're in this situation where the monster goes from being something horrific that has been created and follows your character around, and you have to deal with the fact that you have created a horrific semblance of life, to a disposable, like, throwaway, like, yeah, whatever, march in there, get him to explode. That'll deal max damage because I min-maxed it in this way. Who cares? I'm just going to resurrect another one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is in a weird place between the theming of the Artificer subclass being so Frankensteinian,
Sure.
but the theming of the reanimated little guy being not only more zombie, but more, it's a very specific niche version of zombie, right? So it's more like the Flood from Halo, or it's more like, it's very video game zombie.
It's a necromancer, right? That's what I would expect a necromancer wizard to do, is to create a disposable little nothing zombie.
Yeah, I just wish that there was a little more grave rubbing involved, you know?
I wish that they'd done a necromancer. Like, that was one thing that folks noted online, was why isn't the necromancer in this playtest? Because this would be the perfect place for it. And I agree. I kind of wish we got a new necromancer instead of like the undead warlock, because I think that thematically it fits better and the features are cooler and it's naturally more horrifying, just even in the features it had in 2014, where it's like, yeah, you just raise a retinue of your enemies that you've killed to follow you around.
I've got a thematic question on the mind from having looked at this Unearthed Arcana, and it's, can you effectively do horror in this edition of D&D? And the, you know, that's kind of where our conversation has gone, right? Because, you know, what makes horror, right? The stakes typically make horror, threat of consequence makes horror, atmosphere makes horror. And the way we're talking about it, about balloon animal artificers and exploding zombies, it does not really match up with my expectations of horror. And I would even hazard to say that there has not been an edition of D&D where you can really do horror since first edition, maybe?
Well, the thing is, you can do horror, but the characters aren't the horror.
Yeah.
It's the enemies that are the horror, right?
Yeah.
Ravenloft wasn't cool because the characters were zombies and the characters were creating these horrifying things. It was they were going into the horrifying thing.
Yeah.
And so D&D as a hobby has always been, you are the heroes, and you go off and you have high fantasy, you have pirate fantasy, you have all these different kinds of fantasy. And with Ravenloft, we're going to give you some horror fantasy. Against the Cult of the Reptile God, we're going to give you horror fantasy, but it's not you that's the horror. Whereas what we're looking at here is an attempt, a first attempt maybe even, to outside of the Ravenloft box set of second edition, to bring the horror to the characters themselves and let them touch on it. It's hard for Wizards of the Coast to do that because that's not what they've done over the years. The Book of Vile Darkness was a thing. How well did it sell? I don't know. It had a big warning sticker on the front saying must be an adult to buy it. So that tends to dampen sales for a game that is intended for ostensibly for kids or teens or, you know, young adults. So I don't begrudge them an attempt to do this because they've seen content on their own website that does this. And I'm not just talking about Ghostfire Gaming, right? I'm talking about a bunch of other companies that do it. So the bigger question here is, what product is this for? If I may go to the show notes.
Good question.
Yeah.
Well, back in third edition, there was, I think, one of the best horror books of all time for the kind, what we're talking about here, right? Where D&D can excel at horror, which is a GM creating atmosphere and creating encounters that can create horrific consequences, for example. Heroes of Horror for 3.5. It was a book helmed by James Wyatt, whose name you'll see as one of the lead designers on the new Dungeon Master's Guide, right? An old hand who is very big in the D&D team right now. This is a guy who knows his horror. Is there a way?
Super genre savvy.
Oh yeah. I mean, James did Magic the Gathering for a very long time, and specifically like in the weeds of the lore of Magic, and that's pure genre savvy right there. Every new Magic set invoking a different trope, like Innistrad, for example. So yeah, I think you're asking the right question here, Shawn. What is this going to go to?
I was reminded by the internet, I think we might have talked about this previously when we looked at their release slate for the year, that apparently there is a book announced for October but what that book is has not been announced. So we've got Eberron coming in August, I believe, and we've got Dragons coming in July. The Dragon on anthology book. I can't remember its name off the top of my head. And so there's an October book, and I tell you what, just minor rant. It's not even a rant. Minor note. I miss the days of Unearthed Arcana when it felt like kind of cool supplementary material for 5e back in kind of the 2016, 2017, 2018 days when you had your Ranger V2, your updated Ranger and stuff, where it just felt like, and maybe I'm not remembering this quite accurately, but it just felt like they were throwing out stuff that they thought was cool, that they were kind of toying around with, tinkering with in the background, but it wasn't necessarily earmarked for a book. And then I feel like right around like 2020, 2021 was when it became like solidly this Unearthed Arcana is linked to this upcoming product. And it's kind of been like that ever since, even before the 2024 play tests.
Well, don't you think, though, that the stuff that was happening then, which didn't necessarily have a theme, it was just here's another version of the Ranger, or don't you think that was for an upcoming book that didn't have a theme, but was just your Tashas, your Xanathars? It was just getting content ready that didn't have a theme. Whereas now, as you said, everything we're seeing has a theme. And what I'm wondering is, have they decided not to do a Xanathars for this edition, but instead go with settings and themes? Go with, in this case, maybe Ravenloft-ish stuff. We already have seen the Eberron stuff. That makes me think the way that they're bundling this, we may not see a big book of everything like Xanathars was.
The revised Ranger, to my memory, and this is a little bit beside the point, but that was like 2016, 2017, I want to say. And it never saw... It was not in Xanathars. That was subclasses. Right. And if elements of it showed up in Tashas, that was like 5 years later. I'm not saying that they never reused content from Unearthed Arcana, but that it just seemed like it was more like their workshop being shown publicly. Right. Which I guess is not a change from now, but it just feels like Unearthed Arcanas are so much more targeted towards something now. Like you can bank on it being on these showing up again in some capacity every time. Like I said, it's a minor complaint. But anyway, most likely October would be the perfect time for exactly what you're saying, Shawn, a horror-themed Ravenloft, Innistrad, if they went back to Magic, like some sort of themed book to come out at that time. What would we want that to be?
I mean, Ravenloft's the obvious choice. Would we want to say, like, we want a Magic Innistrad book? Does that even seem like it's on the table, right? It's been a while since Strixhaven or Theros or Ravnica.
I don't know. It's tricky. Innistrad is such a specific vibe as well. It's and there's a lot of lore. Like, what era of Innistrad? Because it's such a fan favorite for MTG people that, like, They've done distinct like story progression phases of that setting. So then when do you set it? When do you set it? Becomes a really significant question there. Whereas Ravenloft, is it super expected, and have we dipped into that peanut butter jar too many times already? Maybe, but
only twice this edition.
Only twice this edition. Only twice. A mere twice. But it is a fairly safe but also fertile sort of land in which to grow your crops of gothic horror. So I don't know. Maybe I'm boring. Maybe I would want... I don't know where I stand on this, Ben.
Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, the most recent 5e Ravenloft publication, is not focused merely on Barovia. It's also focused on a great variety of other Ravenloft dread domains. There's Lamortia, the Frankenstein-themed one. There is Darkon, which is like the Dark Lord has escaped, if I'm remembering this right. And there are all sorts of genres. There's like Mummy's Curse, Ravenloft. There's, hell, back in second edition, there was The Mask of Red Death, or is that the Poe novel? There was one that sounded like the name of the Poe novel, where it's like Ravenloft escaped into the real world, and there was real world stuff with all the Ravenloft trappings. If we look into the back catalog, which Van Richten draws upon, there's a really like the manifold options on what you can do with Ravenloft far beyond just gothic horror.
It's also hard to get my brain around it, just because I think if I was like really in the mood to play this spooky setting, I would just go and pick up, and this is for realsies, I would go and pick up Citadel of the Unseen Sun, or I would go and I would pick up Drakkenheim. There are pre-existing books from third-party publishers that already kind of have my ear and whisper to me in the dark, hours of the night. And so that's kind of whatever this imaginary version of the horror book would be up against for me. And I'm struggling to put my brain into the space of a person who doesn't know of these other third-party options that already kind of exist and have established themselves. And I think that person in my brain would be going to Barovia. I think that's what's happening in my head.
Yeah.
Scarlet Moth in chat mentions, what about Thay and the Forgotten Realms, the land of the liches and necromancers that was teased in the D&D movie? And in fact, there was an adventure said to have been worked on internally at Wizards, focused on the Red Wizards, that was said to be coming out in 2025, which we have not heard hide nor hair of. I like Thay a lot. I like Zastan, the lich ruler of that place. I like all of the nasty wizards. And it is odd that we haven't heard anything about it.
I rewatched the D&D movie the other day, and it's like the third or fourth time I've seen it, probably fourth. And I just realized for the first time that in that like flashback scene with Zastam, that he wasn't already the leader of the Red Wizards, that it was a coup. They literally say it, and I just never picked it up in previous viewings. So maybe I am the lowest common denominator.
Amir Zolkir of necromancy at the time, Zastam.
Mm-hmm. Amir Zolkir.
Amir Zolkir. That could be a Forgotten Realms name too, if you just say it fast enough.
Truly.
Mm.
Well, speaking of Forgotten Realms, we're not going there yet, because the other thing that they've mentioned that there's been a little bit of news on is the book that's coming sooner. So we don't know what the horror book is, but we'll wait and see. Presuming it's the book that's coming in October, because that would make sense, but it might be a book for 2026. Who knows? And that what we do know is that Eberron Forge of the Artificer is slated for release on August 19th. Just a couple of tidbits that are coming out about this book. I think they've put up the sales page for it on D&D Beyond, where you can get your digital copy, your physical copy, or your digital physical bundle. There's not an ad for this book, but just, I don't know, for the sake of the news, it's got 5 subclasses, including for the Artificer, including the Artificer class, including the new Cartographer subclass, which is completely new for the Artificer. And it's kind of interesting that they have, you know what? Oh man, I'm just thinking about this right now. They put the Artificer in this book, then they put the Reanimator in the whatever horror book. That means you need the Eberron book to be able to play the Artificer, unless they put the Artificer in the free rules. Oh man, have they ever linked books like that before? Am I making any sense right now?
You are making sense.
I've heard words.
Have they done it in 5th edition before is the real question. It was all over the place in 3rd and 4th.
I think that they have, but I think in much smaller ways. It really bugged me in, I think it must have been in Theros, that when it came to seafaring, they were just like, if you want to do seafaring, then go look at the rules in Ghosts of Saltmarsh. And I was like, how dare you? Do you understand how much of epic mythology is based on island hopping? How dare you? I was very upset about it.
That still are.
No, clearly, Shawn. Clearly, I'm really over it.
I had noted that, like, it's interesting that they're supporting the Artificer in other books, this horror book, presumably, but had only just occurred to me that you would, in theory, need, unless they put the Artificer in the free rules or something like that, you would need to get Eberron to have access to that core class, even on D&D Beyond.
Unless you can buy it separately.
Unless, but they kind of walked back that whole microtransaction thing a couple years ago.
Okay, then buy the whole book.
How long can one hold back the tide of microtransactions? How long?
It's the only time I've ever heard people mad about getting rid of microtransactions.
Yeah, I mean, look, if they came back, I know that many people were upset when that happened, and they are convenient if you need like that one spell for your character from that one book.
I do feel the need to just say out loud, since this is ostensibly a news podcast in some ways, that this is all speculation.
In some ways.
We're speculating. We're doing some wee speculation.
It's the number one podcast because we don't just do one thing.
That's right. What we're not speculating on, speaking of microtransactions, is these books are not going to cost as much as the other books. Yeah. I did the segue there for you.
That was good.
Shawn, bringing us back on track. Hardcover physical copy is going to go for $29.99 USD, while the digital is $19.99, which is about half, at least speaking of the physical copy, of what they usually are, around 50 to 60 USD. In Australia, they're usually like 60, going on 70, depending on where you buy them from, Australian dollars. So there's no word on the page count. This thing does seem like it's got content in it, you know, new backgrounds, feats, magic items, anyone, monsters. I heard somewhere reporting, it might have been EN World, but or it might have been Wargamer, I can't quite remember. Somebody was saying that there had been Bastion options promised in this book, which I thought was particularly interesting, but I couldn't find that from an official like Wizards source. So
on a different campaign, a different podcast, we were also reported that there would be DM material such as a campaign arc or a campaign template that you could use for a more noir kind of campaign or a sort of Cold War type campaign that you find in Eberron. And the monsters themselves sort of are made for those kinds of campaigns.
I got a question for us. Because as I'm looking at this list of things, and again, this is not an advertisement, so I wasn't reading specific numbers, but I'm going to now to make a point. 17 new backgrounds, 28 feats, that sounds like a lot. 9 new magic items, seems like a specific amount. 25 new monsters, Bastion options, these frames, to borrow a Daggerheart word, to kind of construct campaigns in. A lot of the time, Van Richten's struggled from this. I forgot there were even subclass options in Van Richten's. I find that these wizard-style splat books, to me, seem really unfocused. And I find it difficult to use every part of the buffalo, so to speak, whenever I pick up one of these books.
Let me tell you about the feats, Ben. What did we hear was going to be handled in Eberron via feats?
Dragon marks.
So that's why you're going to get so many feats there. If they have however many, 12 dragon marked houses, something like that, and if they do them maybe 2 or 3 feats per house as you level, then that covers most of the feats right there.
Do we like these style books?
This is the first book of its kind we've ever seen. You know, it's if we just look at the raw numbers, it seems a pretty good value for money. The question is, would we have gotten a more fully realized Eberron book or not? Right? Is this all we were ever going to get in the first place, or did it take the place of something that could be considered more substantial? And trying to answer that question, I think, is a fool's errand.
Sorry, are you saying that don't want to run an Eberron campaign, but you want a book that will allow you to take things from Eberron and use them? I'm a little bit confused on what you're looking for from a book that says Eberron on it.
I'm probably not communicating it well. I talked about this a little bit yesterday on the stream that I did, which is this, and Shawn, you and I have had this conversation before, this kind of differing focus between how to construct a splat book like this and what should be included, right? And there's also, there's a game design philosophy behind this, but there's also like an economical philosophy behind this, right? Especially when it comes to Kickstarters, when you want to say like, we've got 20 million of these and 30,000 of those and blah, blah, blah. But I find Wizards books often have this thing where they only put in the book exactly the number of subclasses, magic items, etc., that is needed from that realm. Like 9 new magic items on its own is not an exciting number for me to be like, oh, I'm going to get some new magic items. Like 9, I don't care. Like I could get magic items from anywhere. We've seen 8 new subclasses, 2 of them from the Warlock for the horror book, separate book. And again, we're speculating on that one because it hasn't been announced. But we don't have a horror theme subclass for every one of the core classes. Arguably because of the design team, we're like, well, we don't have an idea for the paladin or whatever. Like we don't need to put something in there that we don't have an idea for, which is a very admirable kind of philosophy. but to me kind of sometimes makes these books feel incomplete because it feels like they've got scraps of things from different, here's a handful of magic items, here's 1 or 2 new subclasses, or 5 or 6 new subclasses, but it feels like it's not a full experience. And the only theme tying these things together is the setting.
But maybe that's what they're going for here. That's why this conversation I had earlier about maybe we're not going to get the huge splat book of just random things that people are waiting for. Maybe this is, you want to run an Eberron campaign, use the core rules, and here is exactly what you need to run your Eberron campaign. Nothing more, nothing less. We don't need to put in 50 magic items. If all you need are the Kalishtar's, soul symbol and the Sybaris shard and I forgot all the other Eberron gods and realms, and Eberron, Sybaris, and something. Anyway, so if that's all you need, then maybe the tact is, here's the book that you need to run your Eberron campaign. Over here will be the book you need with the core rules to run your Greyhawk campaign or your Forgotten Realms campaign, or etc.
And for me, I kind of like that. Now your mileage may vary on this because, to be fair, I have not bought a D&D book, not counting the 5.5 core books, since before Fizbans. I simply haven't felt the need to, because if I want a big hunk of content, if I just want to be, if I want to have a book I can slowly devour and digest over a week or a month, like a new Xanathar's or a new Tasha's, it's third-party publishers who are making those. Wizards, and this may be a corporate decision, or it may be a more practical one, and maybe recognizing the role of third parties in the current D&D ecosystem and making an informed decision not to try and compete with them and leaning into their IPs, which they do own, right? They have very publicly and very loudly, because of the SRD crisis a couple of years ago, said that the core fundamental mechanics of D&D are for everyone. But what is not for everyone is Ravenloft and Eberron and Spelljammer and Planescape and all of these things. And you can see more and more and more and more. That's where their core releases are getting their gas from.
The more we talk about it, the more... You don't even know what stupid thing I'm going to say yet. You just know by the tone of voice. The more we talk about it, the more I feel like the product model mirrors that of The Sims 4, where, of course, I'm fairly certain that nowadays you can get the base game for free, but the base game itself is like very bare bones. So if you want to actually play The Sims 4 and enjoy it, you're going to have to buy some expansion packs to go with it. And what are you getting out of those expansion packs? Some of them you're going to get sort of heavy on the gameplay. Some of them, the theming is going to be really strong. Do you want the vampires pack? It's all vampire themed. So maybe that's not for you, but maybe you're into the build mode items that are in there. So maybe they're going to get you on those. Maybe the magic items in your D&D product are what you're really looking for, and you don't care about the subclass. You know what I mean? Like it's this really piecemeal sort of thing that in many ways it is kind of necessary to the model, but in order to like sustain a product that makes money. But it can also very, very quickly be twisted into something predatory. I'm not saying that it is predatory or isn't. It's just interesting to look at it and go, "Ooh, isn't that very similar in a lot of ways?" Are you in it for the world?
All corporate capital is predatory, Dael.
Yeah, I mean, hey. But I don't want them to come after me for saying it. I want them to come after you. Are you in it for the world that they are offering? Are you in it for the gameplay options that they're offering? Are you in it for the thematic trappings? Are you just trying to take piecemeal the bits and bobs that you want? If you really want something that is very, very specific and good at what it does, you have to go to the third-party publishers or the mod makers. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It all kind of, there's a certain cycle to it that I think just comes down to good product management and money-making strategies. You know, you think about the fact that a hardcover book makes more money than a flimsy little slim book, you know? So you have to come up with enough ideas to fill up the book so that it reaches hardcover status so that you can get more money for it, so that you can charge more, so that people are willing to pay more because it feels like a quality product. But you can't get too big because then the costs of making that book go up. You know what I mean? It's a delicate balancing act, but I think that shockingly little of it has to do with the creative whims or the flights of fancy in question. I don't know why I'm talking like this today.
People say they want more small books, and people sure buy them. But Wizards has found that these small books, things like 3.5's Complete Warrior, these very hyper-specific products, they sell great within their niche, but they are niche. And if you make these books, which, Ben, you are disparaging, perhaps rightly so, as being unfocused and kind of all over the place, unfortunately, there are enough people out there who want just enough of the niche thing that they've crammed into there that they will buy a book that has 7 niches they don't want for the 2 that they really want. And that's what makes it a better business strategy. It's an anti-consumer, maybe, but I think you could also spin it in the way that each book is kind of an event release, and about the book's release way more, right? I think a lot of people know about Xanathar's Guide to Everything when it came out because they were able to promote it in a singular way and people could figure out what was in that book. Whereas in the 3rd edition model of putting out a book every month, if not more, even if you were a real big fan of Clerics and Paladins, Complete Divine might have passed you right by unless you were really tuned in to the release calendar, the advertising cycle.
Yeah, I mean, I want to clarify, first of all, I'm not disparaging this style of book. I don't think it's a bad book necessarily, speaking about this Eberron book and what's included in it. For me, it's about like philosophy of how you construct a D&D splat book. Because to me, it feels like it's an incomplete thing because it's not providing options for everything a player or players might want, which is fine if Eberron doesn't need that, as Shawn was saying. Like if Eberron doesn't need a paladin subclass because the subclasses in the core book kind of cover, I mean, I don't know, maybe Eberron does have paladins in it. I'm not entirely sure, but like, let's just say, then that's fine. But to me, it just feels like I think it might have been Scarlet Moth brought up in chat how everybody was really disappointed at the Spelljammer book, and the Dragonlance book, I think, was a similar thing.
And the Planescape book.
And the Planescape book, correct me if I'm wrong, I know they were kind of little half books. One was an adventure and one was the kind of splat book style content. But that style content, I think, for people felt really thin because it didn't provide options for across the board of everything in the game themed around its setting. It just kind of, provided what felt like a scattering of things. Here's a scattering of things to make your game feel more Eberron. And if I'm being told like that scattering of things is all you need to feel immersed in Eberron, then I'm like, all right, well, fair enough. But I guess that's my question is like, is this going to make me feel like I have everything that makes me feel like I'm going to be immersed in the world of Eberron?
Doesn't help that the release schedule was pretty brutal as well. It was book after book after book at the time.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Anyway, a couple of people saying that they're overcharging for these style splat books when they're quote unquote incomplete. Just noting again, as Shawn pointed out earlier, this one is coming out a bit cheaper than they have been marking their previous books, $29.99 USD for the hardcover as opposed to sort of $50, $60, which some of the earlier hardcovers from 5e were. So, maybe it feels incomplete or maybe it feels entirely complete, but they've priced it to what they believe is appropriate for what you're getting. And you make the judgment call yourself.
If they want to really be like Sims 4, they should do wacky sales every month.
Speaking of proposition values, on the news this week, tabletop RPG publisher Rowan, Rook, and Deckard have pulled out of attending Gen Con this year, citing concerns for the safety of their staff entering the United States. If you're not aware, Rowan, Rook, and Deckard, their most renowned tabletop RPGs Eat the Reich, although they have a couple of other games to their name as well. Just going to read this company statement here very quickly, coming from Rowan, Rook, and Deckard, quote, "Crossing the border into the US simply isn't safe for us at the moment and doesn't appear to be getting safer. We aren't the first to make this decision. We suspect we won't be the last either. The political climate is only getting worse. While the odds of most of us encountering resistance at the border control are low, we don't want to risk running the biggest convention of the year without any members of staff that we need because they've been detained, deported, or otherwise penalized for beliefs or who they are."
Are you still coming, Ben?
Having this conversation on a public platform makes me a little bit more nervous about traveling across. But currently, yes.
I feel responsible for everyone from Ghostfire when they're in the United States. And if something like this would happen, you would see Shawn go ham. And it doesn't do me any good to do so. But right, that's I feel this not as an outsider coming in, but as someone in the country who has friends who travel here all the time from other countries. And I don't know what to do. I don't know what I would do if something like the stories we've been hearing happened. And it's not even that it's the actual chance of it happening, but it's the uncertainty of what do you do if it does happen? Yeah. Because there used to be something called the rule of law, which was great, where you actually knew laws and then you could follow them. And if something went wrong, you could follow the trail of the law to get to an outcome. We're beyond that at this point. And so I don't feel safe telling my friends to come visit for that reason.
Yeah.
So I definitely don't feel like this is an overreaction of any sort by people coming to visit our country. It is not an overreaction at all.
It's also really tricky. Like Michael in chat asks whether I had any trepidations visiting the US recently. And I mean, the answer is yes. Mine's a little complicated because in terms of like, I'm a really bad flyer. I really don't do well with flying. I come out really sick on the other end and it's like a whole thing. But so for me, it's that exact thing. It's not so much the likelihood of getting turned away at the border. It's what am I going to do if I do a 14-hour flight and I get there and they tell me I have to get back on another 14-hour flight, because that would probably break my spirit. And then for people who are traveling for something like a convention, you're in a really tricky kind of limbo in terms of whether that is work or not work and what categories that work falls under and whether you are allowed to do it or not do it. And a lot of the time you're probably bringing physical product with you that really complicates that interaction at the border, that really brings up that question of where you fall. And ultimately, the individual border person is the person who gets to decide whether you go through or not. It doesn't matter if I have a visa or a visa waiver or any of those documentations that I've put in for, paid for, gone through the process for. The person at the border individually decides whether I get through or don't get through. So that's a really tenuous position to be in if you're putting in the sort of financial time, energy to going over for a convention. It's you really have to weigh up whether or not it is worth the potential hassle, particularly when they have stepped up turning people away. And the extremities of what turning people away looks like, because it used to be they would just turn you around and put you on another plane, keep you in the international wing of the airport until they could get you another flight. Now they might detain you overnight. They might, all sorts of things are happening. So it's kind of scary.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to hear, Shawn, from you that it's not an overreaction, because as someone who tends to sometimes overreact to things, it can be very easy to be like, yeah, some guy on the internet, you know, I watched a TikTok that said X thing. I watched and you don't want to base your information on that necessarily, but which is part of what makes it difficult to kind of gauge, like, is this a high chance of something going wrong, or is this just, a couple of people have been detained and therefore it's making the situation seem worse than it is. And I don't want to make light of it, quite the opposite. The quote that Rowan, Rook and Deck had put out kind of spoke to that, where they said, the odds of most of us encountering resistance at the border are low. But whenever I'm calculating risk, and I'm sure this is the same for most people, there's two kind of nodes that I'm looking at. And it's like, what's the likelihood of something bad happening? And how bad would that thing be if something was to happen? And if one of those is high, that change, even if the other one is low, that changes the calculation a little bit in my head. So plans so far to still attend Gen Con. Ghostfire Gaming will definitely be there in some capacity. We have a stall there. So hopefully look forward to seeing people there. But as they said, Rowan, Rook and Deckard, they're not the first to make this decision. And it remains to be seen if they'll be the last.
I've just been nodding sort of silently this whole segment with a grave expression on my face, but for the sake of the people who are listening at home also, let me just briefly opine and say, yeah, it sucks. It's a really terrible situation. Yeah. And I hope, fingers crossed, that everything goes smoothly for Ghostfire and you and all the other people who are going to come over here at Gen Con, right? It would, just like Shawn, I'd go ballistic. I don't know. And indolently too. Like what would I do? I'd feel awful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of horrible people, we have an email
Oh,
from Peter, who's not the horrible person in question.
okay.
Thank you. I want to make sure we say that.
We love
Yeah.
Peter.
No, Peter's great. I think I've met Peter. Peter's great. But Peter's question is about horrible people being bandit lords. Bandit lords.
Oh, we hate 'em. Ah.
But Peter emailed podcast@ghostfiregaming.com to ask this question. In the 2025 Monster Manual, the bandit crime lord, the stat block, shoots a pistol with poisoned rounds. Now, this is a two-part question. The first part is, how is this pistol poisoned? Is it that it's like poison-dipped bullets? Is it that the bullets are like, tiny syringes, or they contain they're like the Underworld silver bullets from the Underworld's movies, where they kind of like have liquid silver inside of them? That's the first part of the question. The second part is, does a pistol, and it just says pistol, so this could be like flintlock or this could be a Glock, speak to the core fantasy of fighting a bandit lord? Should the 2025 Monster Manual present the core fantasy of a typical monster of its type? Or should it try to branch out a little and push full tilt into something unexpected?
Can I answer the first question?
Please.
I'm going to go with fast-acting sepsis.
Oh, nice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Just like the Wild West.
Yeah, exactly. It's just
pistols?
It's not like 3 or 4 days while the bullet sits there. No, it's just, look,
That's good.
Give the floor to everyone else.
I was thinking the sort of Sword Coast variety answer would be that they've got tiny little magic glyphs carved onto the bullet casing that activate and do like a poison spray when they hit the target. That feels appropriately high fantasy for the Forgotten Realms. But someone does bring up pistols are just part of vanilla Forgotten Realms now. All right. Okay. Are we still in Forgotten Realms, or is Greyhawk I don't know anymore. But if they want to make pistols part of the package of what their vanilla fantasy kitchen sink setting is, then I think giving them to bandit lords is perfectly viable. I think if there are guns in a setting, then when I picture a bandit, I give them a gun in my head.
Let's also note, for one, pistol is on page 215 of the new PHB. It's in the player's handbook.
There you go.
For two, in real life, it doesn't make much sense to poison a bullet, let alone a sort of musket ball style fantasy Renaissance bullet. For three, it is the Forgotten Realms. And for four, the bandit crime lord's a CR 11 creature. If we want to be really picky
He's
about
got a gun.
Yeah. This monkey's got a gun, right? If pistols are core but rare, and we see them, smoke powder pistols show up in Waterdeep Dragon Heist, the Drow, the Bregendareth Drow of Dragon Heist have them. If they're magical and powerful and rare, it makes pretty good sense for a CR11 NPC to have them. It feels
a bandit
appropriate.
lord.
Yeah, and it's like none of the other bandits have it, right? There's some mechanical storytelling happening here, right? Where only the baddest boss of the bunch, he doesn't just have a gun. It's a gun that does physically impossible things, like poison you. It's wild.
The oddest thing about the poison to me is, what is a character more likely to be resistant or immune to? Poison or piercing, bludgeoning, slashing damage? They're more likely to be immune to poison. Everything gives you immunity or resistance to poison. There are probably 50 rules if we look through spells, class abilities, class features, subclass features that allow you to somehow shake off poison, but not so much with bludgeoning, if we call a bullet piercing, bludgeoning, whatever.
Delport Brecklin in chat pointed out that the poisoning damage is lead poisoning.
Yeah.
It will drop your IQ by 40 points if you live for 40 more years.
Please, Shawn, your intelligence score.
Sorry, what did I say?
Your IQ. I'm just joking.
Ah,
We stopped
sorry.
using IQ in 0 edition or something.
Yes.
Oh, what if it's a poison bullet?
How'd they fit it into that gun?
It shoots
a really big
bullets. Yeah.
Or what
Now
if
I'm
it's a
seeing
bullet shooting
catapult.
bullets?
Yeah.
A catapult shooting.
Swoosh. People don't know this, but it was actually the poison from the bullet that killed Abraham Lincoln.
That's right.
Oh.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, bullet to
Now
the
we
skull
know.
would cause some damage. I'll agree with that. The trouble is getting it into the theater in the first place.
I was, yeah.
Branching from that question, particularly being we were talking about the Bandit Lord and terrible human beings, Leon, who is again not the terrible human being, also emailed podcast@ghostfiregaming.com to ask about trying to create entirely human or humanoid villains, and is that possible or viable in D&D 5e? Leon prefers enemies that are humanoid in nature rather than being random beasts or powerful monsters. Any tips for creating cool humanoid villains or adversaries that can hold up an entire campaign?
Yeah, just
Give him a poison gun.
I would say it's not just possible. It's maybe even be easier to create powerful humanoids because you're more likely then to go to the player's side of the fence to look at spells and look at feats and look at subclass features, which tend to be more powerful than what you give to a typical monster. So yes, I would say you could do it. And the most powerful thing you could throw at a party is another party built with the same rules that make, now it won't be fair, and it won't be a short combat, but you can totally, absolutely do that.
I am a fan of what I call the anti-party, which I've had my players go up against a few times, which are not constructed using character creation rules. They're usually just a collection of various CR humanoid stat blocks. Sometimes they have another creature in there, like a construct, who's the K2SO, if you will, of the party. I've been watching Andor lately, or like a party pet or something like that. But that can be fun because it instead of fighting 6 goblins that all have bows and all run away and hide with like one hobgoblin, you create this really dynamic combat where one is a sorcerer, one is a tough fighter, one is a kind of a rogue who's hiding and someone has to go deal with them. So creating like the anti-party challenge, even if it's just a single encounter, can be fun sometimes. Sorry, Dael, you gonna...
Hell yeah. No, I was just going to say, I love humanoid bad guys. They're my favorites. I tend to use beasties for low level stuff. And if it's a like big juicy combat, it's humans that are the problem, or humanoids, because they get to have all the coolest motivations. You know what I mean? And yeah, you could just have them be mustache twirlingly evil, but I don't know. When you build in a lot of fear, I think at the heart of why a villain is doing a thing, it really lands. And then you give them a poison gun, and it's great.
One for each hand.
Oh, I do want to follow up here saying one of the, and we talked about this when we were first looking over the new 5.5 Monster Manual, is that a lot of the things that they added to the book, just by page count of new stat blocks, are NPCs at higher levels, right? That bandit crime lord we're talking about is just one of the 2 new bandits they added, right? They had the bandit captain, both were in the 2024 5e book, but there's the bandit crime lord, and there's another one. I was just looking at it, but I don't remember the name, sort of an assassin type or something like that. The cultist page was expanded from 2, the cultist and cult fanatic, into, I'm pretty sure 3 whole pages of cultists. Clearly this monster book is in full support of the idea of using humanoid NPCs as your villains, or at least taking those same sort of humanoid stat blocks and creating monsters around them.
I mean, you brought up some of the bad guys from Waterdeep Dragon Heist just earlier. Some of the best villains in 2014 D&D sort of history right there. You got 4 different arch villains, and all of them, well, maybe with the exception of, I mean, I do keep forgetting that Xanathar is a beholder. In my head, he's a human, and then I remember.
Dale, did you ever watch the cut scene from the original Star Wars that they filmed never included, where Jabba the Hutt's just a human guy?
As a guy?
Just a guy. Yeah, that's Xanathar in my mind. You're Xanathar in my mind.
Right. But that's a good point about what people want. While Leon might want humanoid monsters, not a lot of game masters do. I think more players and game masters, while they need that to maybe tell the story they're trying to tell, I think the monstrous is sort of the trope that we resonate for. And I'll give you an example. When Xanathars came out, there were a group of people called the Guild Adepts. And we made a book of just humanoid enemies. It was called Xanathar's Enemies and Allies. And it took the subclasses and used them as a template for these enemies to fight. Then we made just a book of subclasses that were in the same style as Xanathars. 10 times better selling were the subclasses than those monsters. I won't give exact numbers, but it was more than 10 times more of the subclasses sold than this book of several humanoid monsters that you could use in your game. And that goes not to the argument of monster versus humanoid enemy, but just in terms of where people's focus is in terms of what they want when they buy something.
Sure. Because I love humanoids as enemies. I love them at low levels because it helps, if you are running dark fantasy or horror or grounded fantasy, having a lot of humanoids, particularly in like an urban setting, helps the setting to feel a bit more grounded rather than having like random monsters just wandering through the streets to attack party members. And it also helps once you wander out into the wilderness and away from the city, you start encountering more monsters. Suddenly that place feels more fantastical, more dangerous, more threatening because you're getting these, supernatural threats coming at you. But in terms of like human villains, I think, I'll be honest, we were talking about horror at the top of this episode. Nothing frightens me more than a person. No vampire, no werewolf, no zombie, no type of supernatural creature frightens me more than a human being because humans are real. And very often those monsters are ways for us to grapple with human traits in a way that feels more expressive or more palpable. Palpable actually is a word, but that's more digestible, I suppose. But like the types of horror that really scare, like some of the scenes from like Breaking Bad in particular and Better Call Saul, whether or not they're heightened or not to what actual gangland war is like, terrified the shit out of me, right? Andor, I mentioned, I watched recently, is really good for getting an idea of what a humanoid villain really looks like and what can motivate a humanoid villain other than just like world domination. The Last of Us obviously is a really good horror story in terms of like the zombies are the source of the horror and they're the cause of the conflict, but they kind of melt into the background of the interpersonal conflict between the humans in that story. And so, picking a monster like a vampire and then just swapping them to human and changing their motivation based on the themes of a vampire. What does this? They hunger, they desire power, they desire riches, they desire control. They don't have the bloodthirst, and that almost makes them worse because they don't have the excuse that they are a literal monster.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos is worse.
Your commute must be hell, then.
Finding stat blocks for those type of characters can be challenging in 5e because, but fortunately, as folks have pointed out, the new Monster Manual has a wealth of humanoid stat blocks.
You can make them yourself. You can do it. I believe in you. Homebrew is so easy and fun, and particularly for stat blocks, for enemy stat blocks, get on in there. And when in doubt, give them a poison gun.
We are not letting this go, people.
Nope.
Making stat blocks in 5e is so easy, especially compared to previous editions. I remember when I spent a whole day making a slightly more powerful gargoyle in 3.5 as a boss monster for my player characters, and I was following all the rules and making sure the multi-attack scaled and had the right feats. It's just a nightmare. I never made a monster the right way ever again after that, unless someone was paying me to do it, because you need to pay me to do it.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, if they haven't delved into monster design stuff, the big fear is that you're going to make a monster that's too powerful and it's going to completely kill the party. It's really hard to do. Unless you are putting in abilities that are like, this ability instantly kills you when it's poison gun, then it's really hard to tip over into a place where you are going to TPK someone with your monster design. It's really much more about the action economy than it is the individual abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you just use the monster stat block of a hill giant and put the right weapon and the right size, you've got a human who's really strong, who's knocking people over. It's that easy. And if it's something more supernatural, they're casting spells that do this thing. The breath weapon of a dragon is just either a nozzle in your sleeve with a tank on your back shooting out poison or fire or something, right? You can make it work in any way, and you're not changing the stat block one whit.
Well, speaking of terrible people, I'm going to be a terrible person right now and end this episode of the Eldritch Lorecast.
Ben,
except
no!
that okay. Send us your thumbs is my cry. Like this video if you haven't already. We'll be back next week, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. If you want to catch us live on Twitch on a Monday, it is Tuesday, 9 a.m. if you're in the Australian Eastern Time Zone. Anywhere else in the world, good luck to you. We're here on YouTube. Likes, thumbs, stars, stuff. All right, goodbye. I've been Ben Byrne here with Dael Kingsmill, Shawn and James Hake, and we will catch you next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast.
Bandit's got a gun.
Got a poison gun.
Imagining a poison Tommy gun that shoots bees.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Oh, we're playing Metal Gear Solid 3, Ben. I control bees.